Brilliant minds, even mediocre minds, operate better under stimulus.
A Canadian is a Canadian, and you can't take away citizenship when someone does.
Barack Obama has systematically rebuilt the trust of the world in our willingness to work through the Security Council and other institutions.
Anne-Marie, you must not talk to anybody in the world, any of our allies.
Whatever you want to call this system, a mafia state, a feudal empire, it's a disaster for ordinary Russians.
I think that's the kind of hypocritical argument that if I were Chinese, I'd find quite annoying.
But historically, Chinese foreign policy can be described as barbarian management.
Science and religion are not incompatible.
Religion forces nice people to do unkind things.
Are men obsolete? And my conclusion to this question is no. I won't let you be, you
Show me the word pretext.
I quoted them saying
Show me
that
the word
the
pretext.
program you can keep screaming that and it doesn't change the point.
We do not want sympathy. We do not want pity. We want opportunities.
It's an appalling slander to me to the Muslim religion.
I never said the word Muslim in my fulmination. It was a Muslim-free fulmination.
It is that kind of restraint. It is that kind of sober-minded, sensible, intelligent foreign policy that Obama represents. So I guess what I'm telling you is he's sort of a closet Canadian. Vote for him, for God's sake.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Good evening. Well, to begin with, I want to welcome the Canadian-wide audience tuning into this debate on Canadian Broadcasting Corporation and on CPAC and across the continental United States live right now on C-SPAN. A warm hello also to the online audience watching this debate everywhere from Facebook Live, our exclusive social media partner, to Bloomberg.com. It's great to have you as virtual participants in tonight's proceedings. And hello to you, the over 3,000 people who filled Roy Thomson Hall for yet another Munk Debate. We salute your interest, your commitment, your desire for informed public discussion of the big issues of the day. I want to just take this opportunity to acknowledge that our ability, year in and year out, debate in and debate out, to bring some of the world's sharpest minds, brightest thinkers, to this stage, to the city of Toronto, to debate those big issues that are on our minds, that have captured our attention, would not be possible without the public spiritedness and the generosity of our host tonight. Ladies and gentlemen, Peter and Melanie Munk. Bravo, you two. Now, I would be remiss if I did not, on behalf of a grateful city and everyone in this audience here tonight, also thank you, Peter and Melanie, for your remarkable gift to the Toronto General Hospital and its cardiac center. A $100 million donation to cardiac science that will save lives. A remarkable thing. Well, look. We are just mere moments now from getting our two debaters out here on center stage, where they're going to be tackling the resolution tonight. One, again, that's on all of our minds. Be it resolved, American democracy is in its worst crisis in a generation, and one man, Donald J. Trump, is to blame. Arguing in favor of the resolution is the renowned editor, the father of the modern-day blog, and celebrated social commentator, ladies and gentlemen, Andrew Sullivan. There you go, Andrew. Now, Andrew's debating partner tonight is a best-selling author, numerous books. He's a scholar at the prestigious Brookings Institution and a must-read columnist in the Washington Post. Ladies and gentlemen, E.J. Dionne. Thank you. Now, one team of great debaters deserves another. So let's welcome back to this stage a formidable debater, the former Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives and the author of the recent best-selling book, Understanding Trump. Ladies and gentlemen, Newt Gingrich. Our final debater tonight, Newt Gingrich's teammate, is a celebrated Wall Street Journal columnist and well-known U.S. political commentator. Ladies and gentlemen, Kimberly Strassel. Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Well, a few more final housekeeping details before we go to opening statements. Number one, we've got a hashtag going tonight, #Munk Debate. Those of you here in the audience and those of you watching online, you can join into the conversation, join into the online debate. We've also got a rolling poll. People will be voting on your performance minute by minute throughout this debate at monkdebates.com/vote. And also, my favorite part of the Munk Debates, the countdown clock. For each of the segments of this debate, opening statements, rebuttals, and closing statements, we are going to put a clock up that will count down the final minute or so of each debater's presentation. When that clock reaches 0, join me in a round of applause, and that will keep our debaters on their toes and our debate on time. So, let's now find out, this audience, the 3,000 people here, coming into this debate tonight, how did you vote on our resolution? Be it resolved, American democracy is in the worst crisis in a generation, and Donald Trump is to blame. Let's see the agree, disagree, the pre-audience vote on that. Okay, 68% agree, 32% disagree. This debate is very much in play, maybe more than some of our debaters thought going into tonight's contest here in downtown Toronto. So our second question, because we always want to see how fluid is the debate, how fluid are people's minds here. Could you potentially switch your vote depending on what you hear over the next hour and a half? So let's see those numbers. Is this audience in play? 80% yes. A very open-minded group here tonight. This is going to be fun. I always love that second vote at the end of the evening, which will let us know which one of these teams wins the debate and which does not. Well, let's begin with opening statements. And as is the tradition in debating, we begin with the pro side. We drew lots for this, and Andrew Sullivan, your 6 minutes starts now.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for having me. I come here to tell you something that in your hearts you already know. The United States is in a state of emergency. This emergency began on January the 20th of this year. It began because we have a president uniquely unfit to hold the office that he does, who represents a threat to the core values of American democracy and the stability of the country, a threat to the national security of the United States and to the world. Those are big words, I know. So let me briefly tell you why I passionately and sincerely believe that statement. The first is that this president has waged a war on the truth from the minute he took office. And throughout the campaign beforehand, for that matter. He lies, and he lies, and he lies. The Washington Post counted 1,300 falsehoods that he has uttered since he became president of the United States, none of which has he retracted. From the idiotic claim that his inauguration crowd was the biggest in history, the world, which you can see by aerial photographs or by your own bare eyes, is simply not true. To a lie so dangerous that 3 million people voted illegally in the last election, something that attacks the very core and the heart and the integrity of the democracy itself. He is unfit because he has violated and wants to violate it and has no respect for the rule of law. This is a president who has told police to abuse suspects as they arrest them, who has told the military that they should torture suspects. The worse, the better. Even if they're innocent or not, they deserve it, he said. He's encouraged violence against people who dare to protest and heckle his crowds, and offered to pay the legal fees of those who commit crimes to assault protesters. He's still seething with fury every day because his Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, one of the most hardcore Republicans you could find, actually dared to recuse himself from an investigation into a campaign with which he was intimately involved. He asked the FBI director to declare his personal loyalty to Trump, not the rule of law, but to Trump. And when he refused, he fired him. And after he fired him, he went on television to brag that that's why he fired the FBI director. This is a man who has no understanding for, and indeed contempt for, the Constitution of the United States. A man who despises the First Amendment. A man who threatened Jeff Bezos, the owner of the Washington Post, with an antitrust action if his newspaper criticized the president. A man who this week said he would remove the license of NBC because it dared report the truth about what he had said in an insane session about nuclear weapons, after which his own Secretary of State called him an effing moron. On national security, this is a man who taunts like a schoolyard kid, a dictator with nuclear weapons, holding the lives of hundreds of thousands of people in his hand, with the responsibility of a teenager chatting on 4chan. This is a man who has undermined NATO, the core of our alliance. This is a man who has declared there is absolute moral equivalence between the United States and Vladimir Putin, a foul dictator. This is a man whom the Republican chairman of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee has said could drag us into World War III. A man who's described the White House as an adult daycare center in which adults have to permanently be on shift. This is a man, fundamentally, with no sense of responsibility for the power he holds and the sacred duty that he is required to uphold. He will use that power, that office, with everything that has come before it, something that hundreds of thousands of Americans have died for, in order to launch petty, vindictive attacks on private citizens, despoiling the very seat he sits in. He is a man, ladies and gentlemen, who is not in control of himself, but who is in control of us. I wish this were not the case. There are many problems in America that predate him. There are many sins on the left in overreacting to him. There are stupid multicultural excesses that we can rightly excoriate. There was an elite that refused to understand the stresses that trade and mass immigration had put on the American working classes. All of that is true, and none of it is pertinent to this debate tonight. This debate is about the worst possible response to those causes and those legitimate feelings. This is about a man who has used those feelings for one thing and one thing only: his own pathetic self-aggrandizement. He is a disgrace to the United States of America. He should be removed by all constitutional measures as soon as possible, by the 25th Amendment, by those around him who know the threat that he is.
Thank you. Andrew, a very strong opening statement. Kimberly Strassel, you're next.
Well, thank you all for having me. And at the risk of lowering the tenor of the Munk Debates, I would like to introduce a new word here tonight. I have 3 children. Before I left, I was telling them about this debate and the resolution, and I asked them, help Mom prepare for this. Tell me why you think Donald Trump has been bad for democracy. And they had struggle articulating an actual reason why, until finally my 6-year-old used her favorite word. She said, "He's bad because he's a poo-poo head." And while Andrew did a much more eloquent version here on stage using very fiery words, that sums up what I believe my debate opponents will say tonight. They don't like Donald Trump because he is a poo-poo head. They will claim that he's divisive. They will argue that he has violated all of the political norms. They will say that he has no respect for his office. They will say that he has undermined America's relationship with the rest of the world. And in all of that, they're largely right. But that has nothing to do with democracy. Okay, democracy is not just what we don't like someone. Democracy is a very formal concept. It is government for the people and by the people. And in the United States, it's even something more specific in the minds. It's documents. The Declaration of Independence, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, freedom from a tyrannical government that overtaxes and overregulates. It's the Declaration of Independence, it's the Constitution, and it's the saying that we are a government of laws and not of men, that we have a separation of powers, that Congress makes laws, the executive enforces them, the judiciary interprets them. Donald Trump was elected because his predecessor violated that Constitution day after day in a lawless fashion. And the backlash that grew in the United States put him in office precisely because he ran as the law and order candidate. It was his predecessor who was frustrated when he couldn't name some of his people and get them confirmed through the Senate. And so he declared the Senate out of session. It took the Supreme Court voting 9-0 to tell him that that was an egregious abuse of the separation of powers. It was Barack Obama who came to office with agenda programs like a climate program, like immigration reform, and he acknowledged that he needed Congress to change the laws to make that happen. And when Congress wouldn't do it, he retreated to his office and began to govern by executive fiat. It was Barack Obama who had a Secretary of State who believed that she didn't have to follow the laws of public oversight, the way that everyone else does, set up a secret server and destroyed her emails when people asked to see what she'd done in that office. It was Barack Obama. Was that good? I hope that was good. This was the prior government that seized assets, civil forfeiture laws, taking some $5 billion that sicked its IRS on Americans and silenced the voices of tens and thousands of Americans in a witch hunt because of their political beliefs. And this was a former government that recently we've been talking in the last few days, and Andrew mentioned, saying that the president threatened to go after NBC and its license. Well, again, sticks and stones can break my bones, but words cannot hurt you. The president makes a lot of threats. The measure is whether or not he has actually done anything. And if you look at the policies... And yes, he's still having some trouble with that legislative agenda. Fair enough. But the threats that he has put in there, what Donald Trump threatened with CBS and NBC is nothing by comparison to Barack Obama, who actually had his attorney general seize and look through the emails of the press, James Rosen at Fox News, an egregious violation of the First Amendment. Donald Trump has put people in office that ran against these campaigns. They are law and order candidates. And they are there to make sure that we restore democracy to what it was before, by getting rid of regulations that made it crushing burdens on businesses, with a new tax code that doesn't reward those who can afford the best accountant, and only those. This is about fundamental change and restore of the rule of law. And you know what? You don't have to take my word for it. It was funny. I was looking in the newspaper just the other day, and I found an article that appeared in the Washington Post, and the headline was, "How Donald Trump is Helping Save Our Democracy." And it was written by E.J. Dionne. And my first thought was, why am I flying to Canada when he's already agreed with me? But the point is even on the basis of what E.J. and Andrew would argue, that somehow this president is corrosive for our culture, they too think that there could be benefits to this, in that if it is causing more Americans to debate and to pay more attention, then in the end we could end up with an even stronger civil society than we have now. But again, this is a president who was brought to office by Americans who wanted to see a return to actual law and order. And anyone who would suggest to you that that's not happening behind the scenes is paying too much attention to a media that's only interested in all the bright and shiny things that Donald Trump says and not what his administration is actually doing behind the scenes. Thank you.
Thank you, Kimberly. EJ, Dionne, your 6 minutes is on the clock now.
I was standing here while Andrew was speaking, and I said a little prayer of thanks for such a vigorous argument on our side of the debate. And I am very grateful to Kim for mentioning that piece I wrote, because I did indeed argue that Donald Trump could be great for our democracy. He could be great for our democracy because he is rallying so many Americans to political action to oppose the very abuses that Andrew opposed. And I ask you tonight to take that 68% and make it 80%, to send a signal to those Americans who know the threat that Donald Trump poses to our democracy, that they have friends north of the border. I want to say it's an honor to be... I want to say it's a great honor to be a guest on this side of the longest undefended border in the world. May it stay that way. May there be no walls between the United States and Canada. We have stood with each other, but perhaps more importantly, we have learned from each other. Everyone wants a neighbor who embodies decency, and we Americans are very lucky to have you. And as you can tell from my last name, my family headed south from Quebec. Alors, il faut dire merci à vous tous. And I do want to salute the courage of our opponents to show up tonight after the week that Donald Trump has had. They clearly have a commitment to the idea that the show must go on. This is a week in which Donald Trump challenged the very idea of a free press. It bothered him that people can write whatever they want, which sounds like the First Amendment to me. He threatened a network he didn't like with removing their license, which had two problems with it. One is networks aren't licensed in the first place, and the other is that the threat of using presidential power against people you disagree with is not the mark of a Democrat, but of an autocrat. And then he told our fellow citizens in Puerto Rico that he might just walk away and allow them to suffer. So yes, I salute the bravery of our opponents here, but I want to point out that throughout this debate, they will cling to one piece of this resolution like a life raft. They will talk about all the problems the United States has had for 5, 10, 20, or 30 years. And Andrew and I will not for a moment dispute that the United States had problems before Donald Trump and will have some after him. They will try to blame, as Kim just did, everything that's wrong on liberals or on Barack Obama or on Hillary Clinton. They will do everything in their power to avoid the central issue because deep down, I think they know that so much that Donald Trump says and does is indefensible. They will blame everyone else for a crisis that Donald Trump has created. We are talking about the danger of autocracy. We did not talk about that under George W. Bush or Barack Obama. Yes, we are talking about the collapse of the norms of democracy. We did not talk about that before Donald Trump. We are talking about, as Andrew outlined, persistent lying. We did not talk about this before Donald Trump. And yes, we are talking about what Senator Bob Corker, an early Trump supporter of a president in need of an adult daycare center. This is a crisis for our democracy. We have never had a president who, from his very first day in office, plainly showed that he had no business being president. Andrew has spoken eloquently about President Trump's threats to our liberty. I want to just talk briefly about norms. Norms are the things that you need people to live by because you cannot write rules for everything. We could start with the most basic norm, which is truth-telling. Daniel Dale, the great reporter for the Toronto Star, just reported today that President Trump, and I quote him, got a new personal record for the most false claims in a week. That's an amazing record. By Daniel Dale's count, he clocked in at 40. And those 1,300 lies or misleading statements that Andrew described amounted to 5 statements a day. That is quite a record. Please do not let our opponents in this debate hold democracy to a lower standard. I know they hold democracy to a higher standard, and I hope we can persuade even them tonight that it is their job to stand up for our democratic life. Trump arouses anger, but he also arouses fear. Fear about whether our institutions can survive a leader who praises strong men abroad and sees them as a model for bold leadership. The United States has not faced as grave a threat to its democratic values and its Republican institutions for many decades. Donald Trump is to blame. Thank you.
Thank you, EJ. We're now going to go for our last closing statement. Speaker Gingrich, we're going to put 6 minutes up on the clock. The stage is yours.
Well, first of all, I thought that Andrew was spectacular. I thought that the rhythm, the litany, the pattern, it could have been a Shakespearean speech. A condemnation of the tyrant, a vicious, unending problem. Go back and listen to it sometime, since it is available online. And just listen to the rhythm. His Oxford education gives him such an extraordinary advantage. In America, if you sound like him, you have a 20-point higher IQ by the act of being able to speak. My good friend EJ continues the great tradition of the American elite media, which is they hated Trump before he ran, they hated Trump while he ran, they hated Trump when he was sworn in, and this morning they hate Trump. I want to pose a problem for all of you that's a real problem for a free society. How would you know? A 4-star general in the Marine Corps, retired, who lost a son in active duty, went to the press court today in Washington and said, so much of what you report is false that it is an enormous problem. Another 4-star general, that was the Chief of Staff, John Kelly, retired, serving as Secretary of Defense, said yesterday, the media reports about Trump wanting to have a 10-fold increase in nuclear weapons are totally false. Now, you may decide they've both been infected, as my friends would suggest. They've become Trumpized. They no longer know the truth. Or you may decide that a great deal of what you believe is total hogwash, brought to you by a news media which is so deep into its own incestuous ideology and its own way of keeping score that it hasn't a clue what Donald Trump is doing, because it cannot allow itself to think openly and objectively. And I'll give you some examples. His speech at Warsaw is an extraordinary document. It's comparable to Reagan. And I say that with some knowledge because Tony Dolan, who was Reagan's chief speechwriter, helped write it and said this was equal to anything Reagan ever said in defense of Western civilization. But of course, if you're on the left, the very idea that you would defend Western civilization is probably proof that there's something wrong. Read his United Nations speech, which has a core argument. You may disagree with the argument, but it's not trivial. He says, the base of freedom starts with sovereignty. If the United Nations is a collection of sovereign countries who then reach agreements, it's useful. If, however, we're moving towards a globalization with a bureaucratic, legalistic system in which our nations are merely subordinate parts of this larger thing, then it's stunningly dangerous. Now, I don't know about you, but I headed, along with George Mitchell, the former Democratic leader of the Senate, a 3-year study of the United Nations. The idea that the General Assembly should replace the Canadian Parliament or the American Congress as a source of ultimate authority is insane. Look at who belongs to it. Look at who's on the Human Rights Commission. If you're not a tyrant or a dictator, you're not allowed on. So they all get together and say, hey, we're doing fine, but of course Israel should be condemned. Israel's condemned like 100 times a year. Oh, it must be Tuesday. Can we go condemn Israel? Now, you wouldn't want to condemn Venezuela or Cuba or Zimbabwe. You certainly wouldn't want to consider what the Chinese are doing to create a truly totalitarian system of information in which they are now tracking every cell phone in China. Oh, that'd be inappropriate. So I think what Trump was saying was very profound. You might look at what Trump is doing to deregulate. Now, you can agree or disagree, but he is returning power to the states. He's returning power to local communities. He's actually following the law. And I know from my friends over here who claim they worry about democracy, the great number of executive orders that were illegal and unconstitutional were signed by Barack Obama. They were not signed by Donald Trump. So there are profound differences. Look, there's a simple problem underway. The American people rebelled. This is not a local thing. It's happening in Austria. It happened in the city of Rome, which elected the first woman mayor in 2,500 years' history. It's happening in Catalonia. You can't blame all of these things on Trump. Merkel just had the worst election since 1946 for the conservative parties in Germany. People are unhappy around the planet. Well, they were unhappy in the US, and they decided that the source of their unhappiness was Washington, and they wanted somebody who'd kick over the table. And here's where we are. He's draining the swamp. The alligators are unhappy, and 2 of the lead alligators are here tonight defending.
Okay, let's hear from those 2 hungry alligators. We're going to go into our rebuttals now. So we're going to put 3 minutes on the clock. We're going to hear from the pro side first. And Andrew, let's go to you first for your rebuttal of your opponent's opening statements.
Yes, I'm very, very glad to. I'm going to take specific points that were made and attempt to address them. The first is that everything that I cited is some invention of the liberal media. The truth is that almost everything I cited is in the public record, on television. His quotes are there to track, to look at, and to examine. There is nothing here that is spin, and everything that I cited was fact. Now, one of the things that autocrats do is mix lies with facts endlessly. They gaslight people. They pretend that the people, and always autocrats do this, that a free press is the real danger to society. Well, I side with Thomas Jefferson and not with Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. A free press is essential. And we have a conservative press and a conservative media, as well as a liberal press and a liberal media. The facts this side are on the liberal media's side. I note also, and I will concede, that Barack Obama did commit and execute executive orders that were out of line. He did so because he was subjected from day one by the insane Republican Party's decision to do nothing but obstruct everything this man did. Even when he was inheriting the worst recession since the 30s, they didn't give him a single vote for a surplus. While now, with a much greater debt, they're proposing another con to borrow more money to pay for tax cuts, not for the middle class, but for the wealthy. And they claim once again that will decrease the deficit rather than increase it. I will note that yes, when you look on paper, some people can write speeches. Some people smart in the White House, even though Stephen Miller isn't exactly your idea of Arthur Schlesinger. They can write some eloquent speeches. I also listened to the inaugural speech, a cavalcade of hatred and fear and demonization. A man who, by democracy standards, Kimberly, actually lost the popular vote. He is rightly president because our constitutional republic has rules that require him to be president, and I accept completely his legitimacy, and have done from day one. But it's precisely those rules of a constitutional republic that he is a threat to. Thirdly, I want to point out that Speaker Gingrich is correct, and I agree with him, that globalization has gone too far and too fast.
And we're going to have to leave that point for the moderated middle of the debate. You've run up against your 3 minutes. Thank you, audience, for keeping our debaters on time. EJ, you're up next. Alligator number 2.
If Andrew and I are defenders of the swamp, then Mr. Gingrich is here on behalf of the Socialist International. Trump has taken the swamp and just added in many new alligators and polluted the swamp far more than it ever has been polluted before. It is Mr. Trump's cabinet secretaries who have flown around on charter planes at taxpayers' expense when they could have taken a car or a train from Washington and to Philadelphia and gotten there much more quickly. It is Donald Trump who, uniquely among recent presidents, who has refused to release his tax returns so we can know how many millions or billions this tax cut proposal he is pushing might save him. It is Donald Trump who has refused to separate himself from his businesses, unlike any president in recent memory. And we don't know what is happening in his businesses, but we do know that somehow there were more members of his golf clubs than ever, and all kinds of influential people wanting to stay at his hotels. The ways in which the swamp is far more polluted than when Mr. Trump got there is legion. And it is not, as Andrew pointed out, the media who have made up the things we are saying about Donald Trump. Almost everything we are saying that is wrong with Donald Trump are things that have come out of Donald Trump's own mouth. It is Donald Trump who said that rather authoritarian-sounding thing, "I alone can fix it." It is Donald Trump who said of our American intelligence agencies that they were taking a shot at him and asked, quotes, "Are we living in Nazi Germany?" It was Donald Trump who said, "Don't worry about any of my businesses because," quotes, "the president can't have a conflict of interest." It was Donald Trump who, when the courts ruled against him on his travel ban, tried to blame them for future terrorism. He said, quotes, "If something happens, blame him," he said of one of the judges, "and the court system." It was Donald Trump who falsely said that President Obama had tapped his phones, he spelled it, by the way, T-A-P-P, before the election. It was Donald Trump who said he fired the FBI director because of the Russia thing. Our case is not based on propaganda. Our case is not based on falsehood. Our case is based on what Donald Trump has said and who he is.
to what EJ just said. Our case is based on what Donald Trump has said. But if you listen to everything that EJ and Andrew have mentioned, they cannot name an example, a concrete example of an action that the president has taken to undermine democracy. Name a column that you have not been able to write. Andrew writes on his blog with more adjectives than he even used up here tonight. Nobody has ever said he cannot do so. But this president has not interfered in the press's right to engage and obviously to cover him and to say whatever they want, no matter how false it is. It makes me laugh. People, the press runs constant articles saying that Donald Trump's approval rating is 35%. Isn't that horrible? Doesn't that say terrible things about our country? Do you want to know what the United States media's approval rating is? 12. So they're really not in a position to lecture. And that number was there well before Donald Trump ever came to office. Talk about anything. I defy my opponents to give an example how Donald Trump has in the way that Barack Obama done. Trampled over the rights of the congressional branch. Stripped their powers from it. Name for me one time that the Supreme Court has ruled 9-0 to stop one of his actions. In fact, I noticed that EJ just mentioned the lower courts and his travel ban. What he did not mention is that the Supreme Court ultimately upheld the main provisions of it because it was constitutional, because it was legal, by contrast to his predecessor's decision to grant far-flung immunity to illegal immigrants in the United States. Now look, by the way, this is a problem we all have to try to overcome. We have to try to get beyond justifying illegal behavior just because we agree with the policy. Andrew just said, well, why did Barack Obama continually act in a lawless way? Because he was obstructed. Well, really? Is that your justification? I'm sure everyone in this audience would be more than a little alarmed if I said that Chuck Schumer's obstruction in the Senate now gives Donald Trump license to do whatever he wants and justifies him in that action. That's why we don't like precedents like that. I'll give you a personal example. At the Wall Street Journal editorial page, I have passionately fought for years and years for the rights of dreamers living in the United States, brought there by no fault of their own, but by their parents, to continue living in the United States and offering all the amazing contributions that they do. But nonetheless, I opposed the way that Barack Obama did it, because you don't simply exempt entire people from the law. We are a nation of laws. Donald Trump is returning us to that. And in the end, as a result, our democracy, our institutions, our rule of law will be stronger. And that's what we need to measure him on.
I did think, by the way, EJ, that it was a tactical mistake to bring up the lower court decision by a nutcake judge who was overruled, I think, 8-0 by the Supreme Court, because that's one of the complaints of conservatives about the judicial system. You look at the Ninth Circuit Court, which is crazy. You look at some of the individual judges that are out there who are crazy. They do make decisions that are crazy. And by the way, on national security grounds, and they were just repudiated 8-0, on national security grounds, the president in the Constitution is the commander-in-chief. He has the obligation to take the steps to defend America. You can agree or disagree with him, but no judge should interpose themselves in a way which makes America more vulnerable to attack, and then be shocked if the President of the United States says, you just made America more vulnerable to be attacked. And when you said that this was somehow inappropriate, it's not at all inappropriate. Franklin Delano Roosevelt attacked the courts. Thomas Jefferson attacked the courts. The Jeffersonians' major campaign plank, one of them was anti-court. And I appreciate Jefferson's appreciation of the media. As I've always thought the Jefferson subsidy of a newspaper to attack Hamilton, while Hamilton was subsidizing a newspaper to attack Jefferson, while they were both serving in the same cabinet, was an example of freedom of the press to take bribes from politicians that is worthy of being brought up by people like you. So I appreciate you bringing up Jefferson. I also want to remind all of you who worry about dissent in America that one of the most popular musicals of modern times is based on the Vice President of the United States shooting the Secretary of the Treasury. We have not had since Hamilton a single incident of such passion, and therefore I feel comfortable that America will endure and succeed in absorbing all of this. But let me go a step further. Two quick things if I have time. The first was something Andrew said that I think you should think about in terms of its viciousness and its dishonesty. And that is the clever mixing together of Putin and Trump. Let's be clear. Vladimir Putin was trained by the KGB. He believes in torturing and killing people. His government routinely assassinates people. He kills reporters who write the wrong things. He has imposed, in many ways, a vicious dictatorship. He's involved in attacking in eastern Ukraine. He has seized Crimea. And to suggest that there's anything in the American system comparable to Putin is profoundly dishonest intellectually and makes it impossible to have a rational, reasonable discussion. Because now, if you accept the two words in the same phrase, you're already in a crazy environment. So I think that's bad. Lastly, one quick example of the real hostility to freedom in America. At William and Mary College 2 weeks ago, Black Lives Matter surrounded an ACLU spokesperson, would not let her speak physically, and walled her off from her audience on the grounds that she had no right to be there. The most violence in America today is on the left, not the right.
Well, thank you, debaters, for a terrific opening to this debate. You've set the table. Let's now dig into some of the specific issues. I think we all agree this debate has a political dimension to it, an economic dimension, and a cultural dimension. And let me start with you, Andrew, and pick up on...
Is there a meaning to your green socks?
I don't know. I just thought they looked really good.
I just think those are so cool. I mean, I feel almost embarrassed to have boring black socks on. I mean,
you and I can trade socks.
Is this kind of a Canadian thing?
You and I can trade socks at the end of the evening. Kimberly?
Wizard of Oz.
Yeah.
There is a debate here. We've got an audience. Can we please get going? Now, look, let me pick up on Kimberly's point, because I think it was an important one in her rebuttal, and posit it to you, Andrew, and have you answer. Many things that Trump says we disagree with. Many of us in this audience, viscerally, by the noises that the crowd has made. But give us a specific, concrete action that has resulted from this president that has undermined the institutions, the values, the norms of American democracy.
Well, let me give you a simple example that is a direct equivalent to the Obama situation. And I'm not defending Obama. I think he did abuse the executive privilege.
But you justified it.
I didn't.
You said it was okay because he was obstructing.
No, I said that was the context in which it happened. I still don't think it was defensible. But I don't think Obama's intent and the way he's behaved in president is anything like as dangerous to democracy and democratic values as Donald Trump. Here's a classic example. This is the man who has faced obstructionism in the Congress from his own party, who has been unable to construct a workable majority for any of the proposals that he has constructed. The fact that he is too incompetent to be a dictator doesn't mean his will and his intent is not there.
So
the fact that the constitutional order of the United States, which has lasted 240 years, has not collapsed after 9 months is not a great achievement, okay? Despite his great efforts. But here's how he acted. And let me take the key law that he's been trying to pass now for 9 months and been incapable of doing so. And that is the healthcare law, the Affordable Care Act, which is the law of the land. And he is required to effectively enforce the law of the land. He has been unable to change the law of the land, so what is he doing? He is sabotaging it. He is using his office to sabotage and undermine the laws of the land at the expense of millions of people's potential health insurance and health care.
Well, look,
now that seems to me sabotaging things when he can't change them. The same thing with the Iran deal.
Okay, hold on. We're going to stop there. Before we get to Iran, we'll have Kimberly respond to this. Does that meet your litmus test?
It's awfully hard to sabotage a law that's collapsing under its own weight.
There is no evidence of that whatsoever.
When you
No
have
evidence whatsoever.
entire
that's not
counties
true.
across
That's
the United
false.
States that no longer have any more than one option for their health care, when people are watching their premiums triple or quadruple, when average basic business owners can no longer afford to
I would
get
have
health
no
care.
health care at all without the Obamacare.
Okay, well,
Thank
many
you.
people have no health care because of it. So we
No,
can all
that's
agree
a lie.
that is not
That
true. I can name members of my family
have
who don't
health care
have it
because of
it.
Obamacare.
They had it
That is
perfectly
a
fine
falsehood.
before it came in, but now they no longer have it. The bigger point, though, is that it's hard to sabotage it, but also, point is,
It's
look,
hard to
this
sabotage it?
It's hard to
But
sabotage
he's
something
trying,
that's
right?
already
Hold
failing.
on, let Kimberly finish her point.
Hard to sabotage something that's failing. But also, the former president, you're talking of the law of the land. This is a law that he unilaterally changed more than 42 times himself and changed it himself. This has now become such an elastic definition of what the law is. Nobody knows what it is anymore because the prior president didn't respect his own law.
A law does set up an institution and a mechanism with regulations. And the regulations to enforce that law are part of the interest of the executive branch to make sure that that law is properly enforced.
And to the extent that
last
he's
president
changing the
attempted
regulations.
to use his executive power to enforce that law. The current president is using his executive power to undermine that law.
Right, but is it abusive as an executive
And it's a
power?
violation.
Why is it not an abuse for
Okay, hold on a
Obama
sec.
to use that power?
This
but
is a
it
debate
an
about
abuse
American
for Donald Trump?
democracy, not a debate about American health care.
That's not
It's
an
fine.
example.
No, but
Talk
it's
about
about
it.
undermining the law. I want to pick up on something Newt said, that this notion that Andrew invented the link between Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump, and he said that it was somehow intellectually dishonest. It was not Andrew Sullivan, it was Donald Trump who said that Vladimir Putin, the man you said was a KGB agent, was a stronger leader than Barack Obama. It was not Andrew Sullivan who said that.
True.
It was Donald Trump who refused over and over and over again to say a critical word about Vladimir Putin in his campaign. You want actions Trump took? Trump fired James Comey because he got too close to the Russia thing. That is an action that is genuinely troubling in this administration. Donald Trump upbraided his attorney general because the attorney general refused to recuse himself from a case that he was plainly involved in. These are intimations of autocratic behavior.
Okay, hold on a second. Let's pause for a second because that is an interesting example EJ's making of a specific action that he's alleging the president has undertaken that's directly harmed American democracy. Newt, respond to it.
Well, I'm not sure which part of that. I mean, he said, in a setting where a large number of conservatives agree, if the term is stronger leader, that's one thing. Tell me one thing in foreign policy.
Let me follow up with that. He was asked on television, where he was actually presented with the point you just made, that Vladimir Putin is a killer.
How does this
And he
undermine
responded,
democracy?
Kimberly, I know you don't want to hear this, but he responded, well, we're killers too. We kill people as well. Now, if any Democrat for a second had said such a thing, you would impeach the guy.
Gene Kirkpatrick talked about moral equivalence. I have never heard a worse case of moral equivalence in the statement.
Can you, Dickie Gingrich, launch an impeachment of a president because he committed perjury in a civil trial? But a president who admits obstruction of justice in public is someone you want to praise. Where is your consistency?
No, wait a second. President, this is something which Andy McCarthy, as a former prosecutor for the federal government, has outlined clearly. Presidents have the authority to fire the FBI director. Period. It's in the Constitution. He's the chief executive.
Yes, they do, but not as obstruction of justice, not to squash an investigation into his own campaign.
Wait a second, Kim. I just want to. This is exactly what I'm talking about.
Where?
Mueller's out there with 17 lawyers running around with a grand jury.
Despite Trump, not because of him.
No. But he's out there.
Democracy is working.
So your argument is Trump is such a powerful autocrat. He's so incompetent. He can't be autocratically autocratic because he's too incompetent. So all the things you're worried about aren't happening because he's not smart enough to stop them. Because the fact is, the investigation's underway. It's underway in the Senate. It's underway in the House. It's underway in the Justice Department. It's underway at the Washington Post. It's underway at the New York Times. It's underway at NBC News. But we're in danger of America losing its freedom because of an incompetent person who can't achieve any of the things that you're worried about.
When a president...
I just want to understand.
I want to
When a president openly hopes for an investigation and fires someone to obstruct an investigation under the rule of law, when he seethes with anger at an attorney general because he obeys the rule of law, when he tells police officers to break the law, when he tells US service members to break the law, his words matter, Speaker Gingrich. Right. His words are acts.
Okay,
and his words continually undermine the rule of law and the Constitution of this country.
His words are acts, because, listen closely, Andrew could not come up with anything that he has done other than that he used his executive power. No, he used his executive power in healthcare in the exact same way that Barack Obama did. Somehow that's supposedly wrong.
He is not faithfully
now we've had to move to.
When you're talking over each other, the audience can't hear.
Words are acts. Okay, that's simply not true. And also, this is so. The entire way, and you guys are some of the worst examples of this, the media has completely changed around this Russia probe story, is incredible to me. James Comey was aware that the president was not himself under investigation. The president asked several times for James Comey to clarify that. He refused to do it because James Comey was a political player in Washington of any that you have ever seen.
No, because James Comey...
And now we know that he was keeping secret memos, that he leaked things to the press, that he, in general, was... Look, everyone, you want to talk about things that should scare people about democracy? How about that the head of the FBI was actively investigating both candidates for the presidency simultaneously with the use of a secret court and wireless warrant? That is concerning.
Hold on, Andrew.
And now that we are attempting to exercise some oversight and find out exactly what happened there and what inspired such a probe and what actions were taken, all kinds of obstruction is happening, but not from the Trump administration, from the career bureaucrats left over from the past administration.
I want to say a couple of things. First, I think Andrew and I have already made progress because Newt conceded that Trump has not been an effective authoritarian because of incompetence. So we have the incompetence of Donald Trump on the table already. But I think what Kim said is incredibly dangerous. What she just did, and what Trump supporters do all the time, and it is why we are frightened about the role of truth in our politics, is she has ascribed all sorts of evil motives to James Comey, who, if we know anything about what he did, intervened in the election in a way that helped Hillary Clinton. And he did not come out with any information about the Donald Trump investigation that was ongoing. Comey was not willing to make a statement before the investigation was over. We know from the Mueller investigation that they have not closed off the idea that Donald Trump was involved in this. They have not settled the matter. The attack on James Comey is of a piece with what Andrew and I are worried about. And Donald Trump was vocally upset when Sessions recused himself, and there would not be a special counsel if the Deputy Attorney General had not insisted. And what we are concerned about, and the reason we worry about our democracy, is we don't know what is going to happen at the end. We do not know if there will be a Saturday Night Massacre, if the equivalent of Elliot Richardson will be fired in this case. And Donald Trump's behavior up to now can give one no confidence that we will avoid that path this time.
Well, you know, let's go back and look at Comey for a minute. All right. When Comey was the number 2 person under Bush, he appointed a special counsel for what he knew was not a crime, for what involved leaking a name from the CIA, which they knew at the time was not a crime. And they knew who leaked it. And they told the person who leaked it to shut up. And they appointed a special counsel who tried to get Vice President Cheney and couldn't get him, and in the end managed to get somebody who was a totally decent civil servant on a technical argument Now, this is where Mueller is going to end up going. Mueller will get somebody. You don't get 17 high-priced lawyers, virtually all of whom voted for Hillary, virtually all of whom donated to Hillary. You don't get those kind of lawyers in a room to change their career, come to work as part of a task force, and not get somebody.
So you're already trying to discredit an ongoing investigation and setting us up so when Trump fires you, you'll say this was political.
Can I finish?
That's what I'm worried about.
No, can I finish?
This attack on the possibility of neutral enforcement of the laws by career professionals, by someone whose reputation has stood up to Republican presidents, including George W. Bush, at great risk to his own career.
You know what? Let me just
this attack. Just a minute, Kimberly. Just a minute, Kimberly.
Whoa. Okay, if you're all talking, whoa, stop for a second. If you're all talking at once, the audience cannot hear any one of you individually. The speaker has the floor. Newt has the floor right now.
I was just going to bring it to the present. It is Comey who, under oath in the Senate, said, oh, yes, I deliberately leaked a memo through a friend of mine who's a professor at Columbia, knowing the New York Times would publish it, and it would force the appointment of a special counsel. Now,
because he was afraid that Trump was going to obstruct.
Wait a second, EJ. I don't care what the because is. The guy who's the director of the FBI telling you he broke the law, which he did, by
leaking... He did not
leaking...
break the law. There was no law broken.
So it's all right to leak memos.
No law
it is all right to leak memos for the purpose of...
Notice, ladies and gentlemen, how the argument has been diverted. Yeah. How we are now engaged in a character assassination of one of the most honorable people who's ever served in Washington.
Can I just point out something?
Because an autocrat, a man who cannot tolerate any opposition, a man who resists any non-zero-sum engagement, a man who cannot tolerate the slightest criticism without acting on revenge, has infected the minds and souls of these people, so they're attacking the integrity of the very process of democracy.
Wait. Do you want
that's how deep the rot has gone.
EJ, that deserves a response. We're going to let Kimberly respond to that.
I do remember that
attack.
The last time I heard a group of people who were just incensed over the abuses of a career bureaucrat and the license he was taking with his office was the entire left-wing establishment and press when James Comey decided to come out and criticize Hillary Clinton in public in the middle of an election.
Not me, Kimberly.
Yes.
Not me.
Well, then you were alone in that because everyone else,
myself, not to be
everyone else was out there. So please don't suggest that it's just conservatives or those here on the stage that now are questioning the integrity of James Comey. We all know that people in powerful positions, they also need to be held to some account. It is very concerning that you have an FBI director who is now so vigorously opposing any oversight of what
Okay,
he did.
I think we've relitigated the Comey affair. Hold on. Whoa.
Wait,
EJ, we've got to move on. We've got a lot of topics to cover. We spent a significant time on this. Let's all sit down for a moment. Okay. Take a collective breath and move on to the next aspect of this. And I'll come to you, EJ, because I want to pick up on something that Speaker Gingrich said in his rebuttal, which is an argument that you're going to no doubt have a strong response to. And that is that the crisis of democracy in America today is a crisis, Speaker Gingrich's camp, a view that it's a crisis of the left, that identity politics in the left, safe spaces, microaggressions, a whole litany of views about how America should be reconfigured and restructured is what's precipitated this acute moment in American culture. This resides with the left, not with the right.
Well, I've known Speaker Gingrich, I think, for about 30 years, and I think in times of high unemployment or low unemployment, in times of national concord and national discord, he has always said that the problems in American politics come from the left. So I don't think that should surprise us in the least. I just want to make a point about this extended discussion we had just now. It proved the central point that Andrew and I were trying to make, which is that our opponents in this debate have to keep diverting you from what Trump has actually done. They do not want any of us talking about the fact that it is Republicans like Bob Corker who are very worried about the possibility of World War III. And it is Republicans in Congress who privately say that they are worried about many of the same aspects of Donald Trump's personality, his approach to issues, his tempestuousness, his lack of focus. Instead we talked about a man named James Comey. So it's Donald Trump who is on trial here today in this proposition. Secondly, if we want to have a long debate over problems in the American economy, about the problems of inequality, we could have a very long debate about that, and I would welcome it. But I do not think it is the left side of American politics that is dividing us in the way Donald Trump did on the day of Charlottesville, when he tried to create a moral equivalence between Klansmen and Nazis and those who opposed him, because many of those who were standing there in the streets opposing them were peaceful protesters trying to oppose the rise of this far right. And look at the rise of the far right itself. I believe that this movement has empowered new forms of political action on the far right end of politics that I know Kim and Newt have to oppose in their hearts and in their consciences. And I think this should worry us. And when we see these movements empowered in our country and given airing, it is not just bad for liberals, it is bad for the entire conservative movement.
We're going to have Speaker Gingrich, and I'll come to you.
Let me be clear about what EJ was just saying. No one on the left wants to take the student violence in Connecticut, where they actually injured a professor to stop a conservative from speaking. Nobody on the left wants to take the people, the Antifa people at Berkeley, who have said they are eager to use violence to stop people from speaking. Nobody on the left wants to confront the fact that in the latest study, professors under 35 are by 12-1 Democrats, and the idea of you getting tenure if you're a conservative is a joke. No one on the left wants to look at the kind of language I described a minute ago, where Black Lives Matter, I thought it was ironic. They literally blocked an ACLU spokesperson from speaking at William and Mary, physically blocked her, and then blocked her from seeing the audience. So she couldn't even mingle with the people who came out to talk to her. Now, nobody on the left wants to deal with any of this. Nobody on the left wants to deal with the degree to which Soros is funding network after network, which is designed to undermine democracy and create exactly the kind of violence I just described.
Spectre of George Soros. No. We can't talk about Trump.
Wait a second.
Talk about George Soros.
I rest my case. You cannot talk factually about what's going on in America and have them take it seriously, because it totally discredits their case.
Andrew.
You may know, Speaker Gingrich, and you may know, Kimberly, that I have been very vocal and consistently vocal against this poison on the left. I do it every week. I do it in venues where I'm likely to get a lot of blowback. I do it at the risk of my career and my job. You're right. There is an awful poison on the left. There's a poison that is dividing this country. And it's a poison that's increasing racial divides, not ameliorating them. And there is also, DJ is right, obviously, some foul, disgusting, far-right movements in this country. My point is simply this, and it's about Donald Trump. He is President of the United States. It is his job, his responsibility, to attempt to bridge the divide, not to exploit it, deepen it, and make it much worse.
I think that if you're familiar with my work, then you also know that I have spent years now writing about the scary abuse of government power and the attempt of people to silence their political opponents using not just tactics like Speaker Gingrich was talking about, but far more scary ones. So I know something about abuse of government power and words like autocrats and tyranny. Let me give you an example of something that did happen in the United States just a few years ago. In Wisconsin, a liberal district attorney was mad at conservative groups that had supported a Republican governor. He launched a bogus campaign finance investigation into these 30 groups under a law in Wisconsin called the John Doe Law. It allowed him to do it in secret and to impose a gag order on everyone who was being investigated. They had their financial records taken, their emails taken. There were pre-dawn raids staged on their home. In one case, a child of one of the targets, the parents were off on a charitable fundraising trip. The police came, broke into the house, put him in a room, wouldn't allow him to call his lawyer, wouldn't allow him to call his grandparents, and as they left, said, if you tell anyone what happened to you here this morning, you'll go to jail. Now that's an abuse of government power that happened on the left. And if I saw Donald Trump engaging in anything like this, you can believe me that I would be the first person to say something about it. But this is ridiculous. We do not have, to this point, we have lots of words, autocracy, tyranny, etc. We do not have an example, even the Jim Comey example. You're not making the case that it was illegal for him to do it.
It is.
He did not break.
It's illegal to obstruct justice.
And nobody has found him to have obstructed justice.
We are under the investigation to find out.
But no one has yet come up with anything to suggest that he has actually undermined any democratic institutions or laws.
Our opponents want you to swim in a sea of red herrings. I have no idea what an investigation in Wisconsin many, many years ago has to do with what's on the table tonight.
No, it was a few years ago. It's government
But the pardon of Joe Arpaio, which happened this year and was done by Donald Trump, has a great deal to do with what we're talking about tonight.
You didn't care when it was happening in Wisconsin, but now suddenly you have a very fine ear about what happened to democracy.
Do you care now, Kimberly, about the firing, the pardoning of Jeff Arpaio? Have you written about it? Don't you consider that a clear violation and abuse of his power?
Pardon power?
Yes, of the pardon power.
Let's look at Joe Arpaio.
Do you think it's okay to pardon?
Kimberly,
pardoning a public official.
I let you have your little excursion to Wisconsin. Let me say something. Joe Arpaio was accused of violating the constitutional rights of people in Arizona. And Donald Trump tried at first to end the investigation, and he couldn't succeed in doing that. And so he pardoned a man accused of constitutional violations of the rights of minorities. Now, this is an action. I am not making this up. This is not what Mr. Gingrich likes to call the terrible news media. This is a fact. And when a president of the United States uses this rather unlimited pardon power to pardon someone who violates the constitutional rights of American citizens, I don't know whose constitutional rights are safe. Because you remember the line, first they came for these brothers and sisters of ours, and we do not know where that story ends, but it rarely ends well.
So let me start with that. This is quoting Bonhoeffer, who of course is referring to the Nazis.
It's actually Martin Niemöller who said that, not Bonhoeffer.
I thought, who was it who said it?
Martin Niemöller.
Martin Niemöller. I apologize, quoting Martin Niemöller. Thank you for correcting. Next time I'll try to get it right. Nonetheless, the underlying point is, why don't we quote somebody who's talking about the Nazis as a reference to Trump? Now, let me tell you why these guys in the end
I didn't use the word Nazi. That idea holds whether you were talking about Nazis or whether you were talking about any regime you might worry about.
No,
I agree.
About tyranny.
I do not make Nazi metaphors because they're a mistake.
It's about tyranny.
Unless they're real Nazis on the streets of Charlottesville.
But let me just suggest to all of you that in a sense, citing the Arpaio pardon is a perfect example of what we're talking about. You can make a pretty good case that it was a dumb pardon, a bad pardon. It shouldn't have done it.
Yep.
That's a policy question. Thank you for that.
But you had an 89-year-old man who had spent his entire lifetime in law enforcement, who had been reelected over and over by massive majorities. Okay, I understand the absence of compassion for people you don't agree with. I'm assuming those are mostly liberals who are groaning. But just think about it from this standpoint. I'm not arguing for it. I'm trying to make a deeper point. So Trump decides that an 89-year-old former lawman probably shouldn't go to jail. Now, some of you would say, no, by God, what a great chance to show the police nobody's above the law. Let's punish this 89-year-old who's clearly such a danger. All right? That's not the argument we're having tonight. That's a policy argument. You can say it's a really stupid thing to do. There is zero question as a matter of the United States Constitution that the President of the United States can pardon anyone at any time. Zero question.
And that's why I am so afraid that he will abuse this power. What he did in Arpaio's case, he could do in other cases.
But he may abuse the power, but he won't have broken the power. He won't be an autocrat. He will be doing precisely what the Founding Fathers wrote into the Constitution to enable the President to do what they thought he should have to do. This was not a bunch of stupid people.
Did the Founding Fathers believe the President who if this turns out to be the case, it's a possibility, finds that people in his campaign broke the law in colluding with Russia in trying to distort the results of the election, and the president decides to pardon them? Do you think pardoning his own people, and indeed pardoning himself, is something the founders really thought this power was supposed to be used for?
Of course, and what the founders would have said, now you're making my case, what the founders would have said is that that's why you have the impeachment provision.
Correct.
And if it turns out that a president were to pardon himself and the Congress were to decide that was unacceptable, they have the full power to impeach him. But you're making my case. Everything you just complained about is totally constitutional, was totally written into the document. He did not in any way abuse his power. He may have done something that was not right in terms of policy. He did nothing that was wrong in terms of constitutional authority.
He is actively undermining the spirit of the Constitution, the norms and procedures that are essential to maintain the Constitution, and he actively every day excoriates and exhibits contempt for the notion of a republic under law in which he is equal, not above everybody else. He fundamentally mistakes the understanding of the presidency in the United States, and mistakes it in ways that make one extremely nervous. Newt,
and
you must concede, surely, let me beg you, that the rhetoric that this man has used, that his love of Putin, of Duterte, his praise of a man who was extrajudicially killed thousands of people, surely you are troubled by the rhetoric and tone of this person. Surely you're troubled by a president who tells law enforcement officers to abuse suspects. Surely there are some lines you don't want a president to cross.
Okay, let's have Kim answer. Surely there are some things I wish he wouldn't say every single day. Right.
Well, then why do you not say that every single day?
On that side of this debate.
EJ, come on.
And we do. And if you read the editorial page, we do, on nearly a daily basis, point out some of the things he does which we think make him a real poo-poo head. Okay? But what you're making it sound as though is that the random things that go through Trump's brain become law or become action. They do not. Okay? Have you met Ryan Zinke, the head of his Interior Department? Have you met Scott Pruitt, the head of his EPA? Have you met any of the people that he's installed in these positions? Because they are the folks who are actually making the decisions and running the government. And many of them are constitutional law professors. Again, Scott Pruitt, before he was put in head of the EPA, led the charge among dozens of states to sue the Obama administration over its own overreach of its powers. These are people with a deeply felt belief in federalism and also the rule of law. They are running the government. And what random things happens in Donald Trump's head, until you can prove to me that they have been put in action, then they're nothing more than your fears and rhetoric.
Okay. EJ, I'm conscious of the time. This has been a terrific debate. I've been virtually superfluous as a moderator, and that's always a great sign of a terrific conversation and important issues being tackled. I'm conscious that we've got our closing statements. We're going to put 3 minutes on a clock for each of you, and we're going to do our closing statements, as is the tradition of these debates, in the opposite order of our opening remarks. So Newt Gingrich, you're going to be up first with your 3-minute closing statement.
Let me just suggest to you that had they worded the proposal for the debate differently, it would have been impossible for us to have any arguments. If they had said, to use your 6-year-old's term, Donald Trump's a poo-poo head, and says really weird things sometimes, it would have been tough. Donald, you know. I mean, the objective reality is this is the first person in American history never to have held any public office to come out of nowhere, defeat 16 Republicans, defeat Hillary Clinton, defeat a billion-dollar campaign, defeat the elite media. He has a hostile takeover of the Republican Party and a hostile takeover of the national government. And that kind of person probably has edges. Okay? So if the debate topic had been resolved, Donald Trump has some edges and they're a little strange, I would have refused to come up here. I would have said, are you crazy? I mean, I'm willing to debate in front of Canadians even if some of them boo, because I think you're so much better than, say, a Berkeley audience. But still, I mean, you've got to have some sense here. That's not what the question is. America has many challenges. Venezuela has many challenges. Catalonia has many challenges. Austria has many challenges. Germany has many challenges. Britain has many challenges. We are living in a period where our culture and our economy is in turmoil, where there are huge systems like Facebook and Google that are uncontrolled and that are changing the entire landscape, and all of us are having to adjust. In that setting, the wording of the debate strikes me as almost impossible for them to carry. That the problems of the American democracy are Donald Trump. He's a manifestation of the problems. He was elected because a vast number of Americans are deeply uncomfortable, and they preferred taking the risk on somebody with rough edges and somebody who occasionally would say rough things because they thought he would at least break up the system that they thought was decaying and failing the country. And I think that's what's been happening. And of course, if you're in the old order, or if you grow up in the old order and you were part of the old order, this is all horrifying. And as I said at the beginning, I fully expect, as the swamp diminishes, that the alligators will be snapping and biting and arguing and yelling, autocrat, autocrat. But in fact, what's happening is America is once again reinventing itself.
I want to thank you all for your attentiveness, and I have to say that I salute Newt Gingrich for trying to make Donald Trump seem almost cute and eccentric at the beginning of his talk. I also appreciate his calling us alligators, because they're cute in their own way. And I want to point out that what happened at the end of the debate is precisely what I said would happen, which is our opponents here want to hang on a few words of this proposition and say that if you don't believe that Donald Trump caused all the problems that the United States faces, then you really can't vote for this proposition. We are asserting something else. We are asserting that Donald Trump is the crisis, is the problem. They say that we presented no specifics. They couldn't really answer us on Joe Arpaio. They had to go off on a long bit of character assassination to dispute what we said about James Comey, which is true, which is Donald Trump said that he didn't like what James Comey was doing about the Russia investigation. That should be genuinely alarming. It is Trump himself who holds himself above the norms that every other politician, I should say, including Mr. Gingrich, held themselves. He says, I don't have to get rid of my businesses. I don't have to release my income tax returns. You don't have to know anything about me. I can do what I want. If that isn't autocratic, I don't know what is. American democracy was never supposed to give us a leader like Donald Trump. We have had more or less ideological presidents, more or less competent presidents. We've had other presidents who've divided us, but never as consciously as Donald Trump has. We have never had a president who has aroused such grave and widespread doubts about his commitment to the institution of self-government and to the norms of democracy. We urge you to vote for this proposition to send a message to us. Now, I believe to us, meaning we Americans, Now, I believe that the United States is more tolerant than Donald Trump. We are more committed to democratic freedoms than he is. The American people are more open to progress and hope and to the future. That is why the vast majority of Americans disapprove of Donald Trump. Yes, Donald Trump has created the worst crisis for our democracy in generations, but I want to reassure all our Canadian friends here that we shall overcome.
About what we have actually established here tonight. So as Newt said, we have established that the president is a bit of a poo-poo head. He's a little odd, a little off. He definitely does not govern in a way that anyone else has, and he says things that many of us wish he wouldn't all the time. We have established that a lot of people do not agree with Donald Trump's policies, including Andrew and EJ, and are furious that he was elected, and will do what they can to discredit him in office, and that the media will do so too. As Newt said, half of the stuff that comes out of the media, it's directly disputed by four-star generals, by others, but it doesn't stop them from writing it. So there is an active and hostile campaign. We've established that if you throw around lots of scary words like autocrat, tyranny, and Putin, and you put them in the same breath as Donald Trump, that you can scare people and make them start thinking in an alternate reality to what's actually happening in Washington. But here's what we have not established, because it goes to tonight's resolution. We have not established that Donald Trump has undermined or hurt in any way the actual rules and forms of democracy in the United States as we Americans view them, okay? They mentioned Jim Comey. He had the right to fire him. They mentioned Joe Arpaio. He had the right to pardon him. They talk about different moves that he's taken. There's no one disputing that the president has the right to change regulations within Health and Human Services to change the president's health care law. You might not like how he's doing it. You might agree but with the policy of before. But you might not like that he got rid of the climate program, but he did so because it was pushed through without congressional approval, had been immediately stayed by the Supreme Court because they recognized that it likely violated the Constitution because of the way it was put through. No one can point to anything that has undermined, again, those basic structures that we have.
What about banning the LGBT from the military?
I didn't know we were debating. No one is disputing that he can do that too. I am not saying it's the right policy. Many people can disagree, but you don't just get to revolt if you don't like it. This is why we have elections. And I appreciate that many people in this room did not like the way this election went. Many of us on the Republican side, Donald Trump was not our first choice for the nomination either. Okay? But we had an election that was peacefully conducted, it was honestly conducted. And there is no proof otherwise. And if you think so, you're reading that press again. Wait and see what actually happens before you make your mind. But I ask you to vote against this. Don't believe the hype. Actually base this on the facts of what he's done so far.
Ladies and gentlemen, I want to end with agreement with Speaker Gingrich that America is facing, and the world is facing, extraordinary challenges. Extraordinary challenges of the economy, of technology, and the extraordinary dangers and difficulties of a multiracial and multicultural society. America is the first white majority country in the history of the world to become a non-white majority country. Technology is ripping people's lives apart. It is impoverishing many people and stagnating the wages of many more. It is a difficult, emotional, troubling time. But it's precisely because we're in such a difficult moment that it is vital that the Constitution of the United States, respect for the rule of law in the United States, civility in our language and discourse is maintained in the United States. And rules and norms and procedures that have protected our democracy for centuries be upheld. And that is why when we have a president who has contempt for that Constitution, who has pushed it in 9 months to the breaking point, who has exhibited every capacity and instinct for authoritarian rule, who delights in dividing, whose statements divide Americans every day in completely unnecessary ways, a man who can turn the National Football League into a matter of deep division, and who acts on the international stage with a recklessness and an ignorance and a pride and a vanity that puts all of us and our lives and our security at stake. It is because he is absolutely the worst possible answer to these problems that he is intensifying and deepening these divisions, that he is tearing America apart emotionally, culturally, and politically, that the country is fast dividing into two warring tribes, and in which the one person that we need at this moment to bridge those divides, to address these problems with sincerity, is the president. And he had a chance if he had reached out to the Democrats, if he'd engaged on infrastructure, if he had withheld his vicious tongue, if he were able to control himself. He could have been a great president. But he isn't. He is what he is. And what he is a danger the likes of which we haven't seen in our lifetimes. Vote for this proposition.
Well, thank you. That was a terrific and hard-fought debate, and it reminds me of something Peter Munk once said on this stage, which is one thing to give a speech in front of an audience of people who agree with you or disagree. Something quite different, though, to get on a stage and engage in verbal and mental combat with your intellectual peers. So, ladies and gentlemen, a round of applause for our debaters. Fabulous debate. Well, we're going to have some fun now. You've got a chance to vote again on tonight's resolution. We know what it is. Be it resolved. American democracy is in the worst crisis in a generation, and Donald Trump is to blame. Let's take a look again at how you voted at the start of tonight's debate. 32% of you disagreed. The rest of you were in favor of the motion. And again, we asked how many of you could change your minds. Upwards of 80% might potentially switch your vote to one side or the other. So, you each have a ballot in your program. There's a pencil with that ballot, and there are ballot boxes on the way out. Vote once, vote carefully, send a message. And again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being part of tonight's Munk Debate. We'll do it all again in the spring.